Well, hello, and welcome to Work Cookie, our weekly gathering of IO's HR's recruiters and an actor, as we try to make the world of work just a little bit better. And Dr. Emmy, you're going to be leading us again today. So where are you going to take us?
Ooh, I get to take us into my favorite topic land, which is human-centric leadership. And the age of AI is really the title of the podcast, which is really the importance of human-centric leadership, or the precipice for the importance of human-centric leadership. So I'm going to put some resources in the chat. Give me just a second. But I want to actually start with the bottom resource, which is just the website. And this particular website is from Artisan AI, who has a set of advertisements out there today that are oh gosh, that's not right. Sorry, give me one second. I'm so sorry. I'll get these resources in here, I promise. But this particular company has a very interesting advertisement strategy, and their billboards are located everywhere. And they start with "Stop hiring humans." So they're posted in major cities, Miami, Houston, several California cities. You can actually, if you just even Google Artisan AI, you'll probably find a whole host of popular press articles that are talking about their ad campaign for this. Now, the CEO has reported that he does value humans and he hires humans, right? And so he's given some pullback. It's like, I fished and now I'm reeling back a little bit on the advertisement, but they're out there, right? And so these are very bold statements out there. And as I was actually at the SIOP conference, I noticed that that's the trend even in some of the advertisements there for coaching or for other AI technologies that are industrial and organizational related. It really wasn't the focus on elevating the human experience through our jobs, right? It was, how do we replace some of these functions within the organization, was the primary focus of a lot of these tools, which is interesting because really what the research is showing is that the move towards this technology integration really does need to focus on the people, right? So person-centric might be the term you see out there sometimes, and human-centric is the other term, but there is a large research gap here. When I look at peer-reviewed articles on human-centric leadership, there really are very few. But the first one listed in the set of resources there is around building digital-ready leaders, and it's a scale that was developed around human-centric leadership. This actually came out, I think, in March, so very recent article, and it has some factors or some areas that we can consider when we think of what is a human-centric leader and why we need it. So we talk about AI, but the next kind of evolution theoretically is AGI, which is going to be more human-like technology theoretically, right? So a lot of this is theoretical research or theoretical conversations around what that looks like. But what I found is that it really requires us to start defining, even in the workplace, what people are, what the people tasks are, what the people functions are, as we're redesigning jobs, as we're integrating this. And that particular scale listed some interesting elements. So positive attitude was on there, ethical AI use, growth mindset, which I think is obviously that learning aspect, right, of continual learning, track record, which I found interesting, transparent agenda, skills acquisition, and participative style of leadership. I would add on to that situational style, right? That's something that you'll see out there in discussion around AI, but not necessarily enfolded with human-centric. I think there is a lot of research to be done here, right? A lot of gaps exist. One of the biggest takeaways I had from SIOP, in fact, was that gap between our research and bringing it to organizations, having them implement the best practices and seeing this actually permeate our workplaces. And there's a bridge to be built in some of these areas. So I brought up those, but I do want to kind of define what I mean by human-centric leadership. I think in the absence of a lot of research out there, in the absence of a lot of literature out there, we're having to mold this right now in real time, right? And so it's focusing on well-being, which was a hot topic at the SIOP conference too. Not just personal well-being, organizational well-being was a really interesting topic there. I think Ian was actually integrated with that session. So that organizational well-being and individual well-being, growth and empowerment is really that focus, right? So the person-centered focus that's emphasizing the individual, the needs of that individual, the culture that individuals require to be their most effective work selves, especially in an environment where we have thrown in lots of fear things like stop hiring humans. Right. And so when we have two conversations happening, and there's a bridge that I think is definitely needing to be built. And some of the areas in my particular research that I looked at were around empathy and compassion, what that looks like in leadership, collaboration and communication as well. We have obviously always had the conversation in leadership around communication, but there's now this added need to be able to explain our explainability, right, of our technology and what we're integrating and what we're doing, which is going to require what we heard earlier, which that growth mindset. Leaders are needing to fold in digital literacies that they've never had to before, and many are rejecting it. And I've seen that personally, and I've actually talked to several different people who are working with clients that are seeing a rejection, a push of some technologies in some cases as well. And so it's an interesting conversation where we're seeing in research we need to know these things, but then we're seeing in practice that we're not actually driving in the direction of the research. So that's our topic to start today.
Well, let me take you forward in the future to 2075, and Hollywood is my inspiration. And you're an IO psychologist, and I've come to you because, my partner at work is an AI, and he looks human and everything, and, he wants to be human, and he's more logical than I am, and he's got better emotional intelligence skills because he's programmed, but he wants me to treat him as a human. And I'm like, no, you're not a human. You're not one of us. I'm going to discriminate against you because you're a piece of hardware. And we just hired you to come in and fix the problem.
Yeah, so I love that you bring that up. I mean, I think there is definitely going to be that theoretical or philosophical element there, right? What is a human? One of the resources I didn't add there, which I'll pop in a little bit, is a book called Personhood in the Workplace that was written 2023 or early 24. I think it was 23. And I used their definition of personhood, which is a shared inner experience for humans, right? And I think it does require us to define what a human is if we're moving into more human-like capabilities with our technology. I am definitely of the school that thinks we're different than anything that we could create, but that's not everybody. Some people do think that humans will be obsolete. Yuval Harari is one of those. If you look at his writing and his work, you see predictions from Bill Gates and Elon Musk, who are technology powerhouses, right? When you think about leadership in the tech space, predicting that within the next 10 years, there'll be more robots working than humans. But what is the systemic impact there? And I think that's what human-centric leadership then needs to step up to really define. There is a huge systemic impact. If you put yourself in a society in which, let's say, 90% of your people are out of work, what does that look like, right? And you start playing the tape forward and thinking about how the government would need to change and how people's lives would change, right? It's some big things. If you think about these predictions in a reality sense, I'm not saying that they're right. I'm not saying that their predictions even hold any weight. But what I am saying is if they do, we do need to examine where some of this is coming from. They are building this technology. So these predictions should hold a little bit of weight from the sense that they have a lot of money invested in this technology, right? So it does bring the need for some conversation around how we put some stopgaps in place to focus on humans. I am 100% a human-centric leader, but I know that's not everyone. There are definitely tech-centric leaders or profit-centered mentalities, right? And how do we balance profits with humanity, particularly when you're leader of a company that has lots of profits and you don't really think like we do?
Well, we've had artificial insemination around for a very long time, and somehow men are still around. So maybe we do have some useful traits. LindaAnn, let's go to you.
Wow, Tom, that's hard to follow. I want to get back to what Emmy was saying.
Yeah, please do.
When you look at talking about human-centric leadership and how it's integrated with AI in the workplace and so forth, I think we need to look at the fact that in many cases, in a lot, I would say the majority of businesses, leadership skills in general are not being addressed, right? So you are starting from a zero baseline on some of this stuff. And then to expect that they're going to be addressing the necessary skills to incorporate AI into good leadership is skipping a step, right? It's a real stretch for that to be expected. And so I'd like to know what people think about how do we get them to address what leadership skills are and then create the adaptation, and integrate it into their workplace and then create the adaptation for AI, and how do we integrate technology effectively. There's been many other iterations of technological innovation that we've learned to integrate, and this is just a big one. And so people are having a little bit of a hissy fit over it. But also, you have to look at, for me, my experience in the workplace has been that the young millennials are a little resistant. It's not necessarily, the boomers or the elder millennials or whatever that are the resistant ones. But once you show them how it really can change their world and make them more effective and take away all the crap that they have to do, then they go, oh my God. And it's like this snowball effect. But still, that doesn't address the basic, it's like the basic food groups, right? There's certain elements that you need in leadership. It doesn't matter what you're trying to overlay. It has to have the core stuff, and then you can overlay it.
I have noticed in the last, maybe 2 months, all of a sudden there's a lot more leadership training that's being implemented by organizations. It's should have been done 5 years ago. But do you think, we're already a little bit behind in turning managers into leaders, but now we've got to add another skill set? I mean, are we ready?
Well, it doesn't matter if we're ready, right? The time is now, right? We have to be ready and saying, well, we should have done or whatever. It doesn't really matter. You can't go back. So it's like, get on the horse, and figure out what you need to take to move forward. So I think anytime you pick up the challenge is the good time.
Yeah. And still, I'm hearing organizations who, when, I talk to their IT department and say, are you guys incorporating AI? They're like, oh, no, way too risky, way too many issues. So are we once again going to get into that issue of the early adapters are going to succeed?
I don't know, Tom. I think when you're an early adapter, you have a better comprehension of the complete process, right? When you understand where it came from, what it could do then, and you adapt and integrate as it evolves, you are far ahead of the game than somebody like 5 years from now trying to integrate it, because you don't have that complete picture. And so my experience has been, be an early adapter because it helps you evolve if you're willing to evolve, right? It helps that evolution, and you can learn it as you go. It's that kind of thing. When you try to learn a new software, trying to learn it all in a one-day seminar, you can't do it. But if somebody sits next to you who's capable, and as you go and face a problem, they can say, oh, you do it this way, you do it this way, you do it this way. You take away a lot more. And so that's my philosophy.
It's a great philosophy. It's a big if you're ready, but that's where we are. Nick, let's go to you.
Yeah, it's a fascinating topic. And I think if you talk about, human-centric leadership, there's still a lot we can do in the current system. Capitalism often has a lot of collateral damage. And, if you don't think about those second, third, fifth, 18th order magnitude consequences of decisions, then you get a lot of what we, hear people, decry all the time. I think one thing that is important if you're going to have human-centric leadership in terms of dealing with technology, you also have to remember the technology is the technology. It is so easy for us to personify. How many people say please and thank you to the chat agent? It's very easy to put on the technology something that is or is not there. It is taking numbers and making sure that, data in, data out is still what's happening. There's a lot more steps in between that we don't know what's going on because we don't have somebody guiding that. We have trained the program to program itself. And so I think when you remember that, it is still, you can have a bad program. So bad data in is going to be bad data out. And I think we'll find as we are just seeing this train pull out of the station and so many people are just running to try and catch up, whether the technology is ready, right, or good, doesn't matter. It's on its way, and it's maybe a little bit of a ready, fire, aim as far as dealing with some of the consequences, but it's exciting and it's advancement, and so people want to be out on that bleeding edge. But there are things we're going to discover that we're going to have to go back and tweak, and maybe those things will be harder to do once everything's in full motion. And I have.
Well, let me ask, yeah, but let me ask you this because the start of the Industrial Revolution was pretty darn exciting. Wasn't that good for the workers in the factories? So, are we going to slip into that with this AI revolution? Are we going to find that if I can get an AI and I don't have to pay a human, that's an easy decision for me?
Well, that's kind of the crux of the problem. Like if we're focused on productivity and efficiency and optimal and all of these things, yeah, of course the machine's going to be able to do it better because they don't have to sleep or eat or have things going on other than what they're programmed to do. Again, it's far too easy to personify some of those things. But I think as we get through some of this cluster, you'll see that, okay, maybe not everything needs to be done by AI. And now you have this bespoke sort of, I'm a human writing this. I think the writers and actors strikes concerning AI are legitimate because it's getting very good as far as being almost there. But I know I've wrestled with even writing iterative things with AI, that's not what I want to say. That's not how I want to say it. And so I think the more people rely on Copilot and Gemini and all these things that are just being built into the technology, the more you're going to be able to stand out by just taking a beat and saying, okay, I can use the AI to see what the general idea is, but where can I put my touch, my fingerprint, and my voice into that so I can sound different than everybody who's just using the same thing?
And that's the exact same discussion that the arts are having right now, is how can we use it and not let it become the artist itself? Thank you very much for that. Paul, let's go to you.
One thing that occurs to me is that there's this AI fallacy that progress is linear. And so people say, well, we've gone from 0 to 10 in the last 5 years, so we'll be at 20 in 5 years from now. And, and it's linear. When I was a kid, people assumed that by now we'd all be driving flying cars. We'd have bases on the moon. We'd have bases on Mars and a lot of things. And no one predicted what was going to happen with computers. So if you've used AI, I've used it for a lot of different things. And the more I use it, the less impressed I am. You can't trust it to do much of anything on its own. You have to very closely supervise it. And so what that means is for some tasks, it can save you a lot of time. I have a couple of times I had it help me write a letter of recommendation. I fed in all the information, which I wasn't very familiar with, that the person sent me. It wrote me a letter. I didn't use one word of the letter, but it did help me organize it and probably saved me a lot of time. Doing lit reviews, you got to double check everything it does. It's easier to use PsycInfo or Google Scholar. So we're at a point now where we're just really figuring out what it's good at, what you can trust it to do, what you can't trust it to do, where it's going to save you time, where it won't save you time. So the idea that it's just going to replace us all is really silly because you can't take the human out of it. A friend of mine and I were playing with it. We both asked it to write our bios. It was the same bio with keywords substituted. Our names, I'm an expert on stress. She was an expert on emotion, but it was exactly the same framework. It was totally formulaic. So it's really hard to use it for a lot of things. Some things it does well, some things it does terribly at.
Well, that's a really interesting point because when I think of, this type of technology and what it could replace, the idea of having a psychologist or a clinical social worker who is an AI, boy, I'd be able just to dial one up. But once again, it does take the human out of it. So how much time do you think we have, though, before that technology is developed where we might not be able to tell whether it's human or not?
It's impossible to know. It could be next year. It could be 100 years from now. It could be never. I mean, there's certain laws of physics that you just can't violate, and so there's really no way to know. A friend of mine works for a company that's doing AI coaching, but they're doing it because they said companies can afford to have coaches for top executives, but not lower level managers. So they figure it would expand the number of people who have a coach, but they're not going to just give you a link to a chatbot to be your coach. You know, you first sit down with a live human, and their idea is you meet periodically with a human, and then in between, you're working with a coach on your own. Just as we still have classes at universities, but we have a lot of online self-paced instruction also.
Yeah. Thank you very much. That actually makes sense to me. So thank you. Lee, let's go to you.
Yeah. Language is such an interesting thing because, we'd love to use wrong words. Just as a society, we love, AI does not exist. Let's just put that out there.
Mm-hmm.
What we call AI are large language models. They're mimics. They are not intelligent. Artificial intelligence is what you see in a sci-fi film. Hello, Dave. It's not thinking for itself. It is taking an algorithm, it is looking through a database, and it is pulling out the most likely response to whatever input you put into it. Maybe it's right. Maybe it's not. Like Paul said, okay, I got two things. Well, I'm just going to input different stuff into the blanks in the form, and like all algorithms, trash in, trash out. And, we have repeatedly shown on different times that when the learning model behind it gets corrupted, you start getting some crazy stuff coming out. And, what was it? Was it Google's AI that they put some stuff in and all of a sudden it became like the most racist thing on the planet? I mean, it can go off the chain in a hurry, and because the processing speed is so much faster than us, it can go off the chain much faster than we can. So, those are things that you have to be cognizant of. And it's just like, you brought up the Industrial Revolution. I mean, this is no different than the cotton gin or the assembly line or the robotic welder or any other piece of technology that we have developed over history. The wheel, the water wheel, run grinder, in a mill. These are all things that over time have been developed because man inherently wants to make life easier. Because, I don't want to work so hard. I want to go fishing. And so we develop ways to make things easier, build a better mousetrap and all. And over time, these things happen and it will, positively affect some and it will negatively affect others. Some will be temporarily negatively affected and they will adapt, and some will come out much, much better on the other side. And then there are others that will not. And we saw it in the Industrial Revolution. I mean, there were people who lost their jobs and they never recovered. And then there were others who learned new skills and they became titans of industry, who came from nothing. And so this is going to be, it has been and will continue to be the same way. Will people lose their jobs? Unfortunately, yes. But then there will be new jobs created. There will be new categories of jobs. There will be new classifications of jobs. We are still, I suspect, to Paul's point, we don't know, timelines, but I suspect we are a long way from the obsolescence of humans because machines of any kind left to their own devices eventually break. Computers, if you run a computer program and you just let it go, it will eventually destroy itself. It will eat itself. Have you ever played the game The Sims? You set up something and you set up a perfect system and you just let it go, it will die. It will eat itself because it has to have some form of maintenance. Somebody's got to nudge it a little bit to get it back on the path here and there. That's a role humans are going to have to play for the foreseeable future, no matter what it is. And as far as the, AI as coach or AI as counselor or whatever else, to some extent, there's a utility for that, but there's also a danger in that because it's it's pre-programmed. I mean, think about the time you called any customer service line, press 1 for English, and we're all going, human, screaming into the phone because you want to talk to somebody. You're hitting 0 and it's going nowhere. I'm in a death loop. And what happens when you get into that and you stump the AI and you get into some suicidal person's in a loop and they can't get help. Those are the dangers that you're dealing with. And you have to be very careful about, we're just going to hand off our mental health to AI. What could possibly go wrong? There's some psychological, and philosophical things out there that if it can go wrong, it will. And so, we have to be very cognizant of those things. And, I know what they say, plan for the worst, hope for the best. And, what's going to happen is usually somewhere in the middle. And the problem is that you get those people who are so gung-ho, this is going to be the best thing ever. And we're going to, it's going to make our lives amazing. We're going to all just sit around with our feet up and AI is going to do everything. And we're going to bring in robots and they're going to cook for us. Yeah, slow your roll there, buddy. And, then you got the others that, oh my God, Skynet's coming. We're all going to die. Well, we're somewhere in the middle there. And we need to all just kind of remember the bell curve is thickest in the middle. And that's where we all, that's where we are. And we all need to just understand that, LindaAnn is right. Get on the cusp, be on the bleeding edge as close as you can and learn what you can, but understand that like all new technology, there are mistakes to be made. There are lessons to be learned. And there's going to be a day that they're going to hand this off to something critical and someone is going to die. Unfortunately, that's going to happen. They're going to put, talk about like self-driving cars that have run over pedestrians, things like that. We have to be cognizant of the challenges here and not be in too much of a hurry to hand over the reins to something that isn't as intelligent as we would like to think it is.
Well, I think you might be a robot. But thank you very much for that. Ian, let's go to you.
The worst part about going after a few people is going, oh, which do I respond to? There's so much cool stuff. I'll push on one pushback to some of what Lee was saying, and really just one statement that it's no different from the cotton gin or the printing press. And there's one of my favorite books. It's The Authoritative Guide to Expert Misinformation, or so it's called Expert Speak. But it's all the times throughout history that experts have said, this will be the destruction of humanity. The Gutenberg printing press will never be able to communicate again. You can't take the human out of it. And I would say that while I agree that this is another edition of technology, and fundamentally it is of similar nature where there will be catastrophizing that will not manifest in that it is fundamentally a tool, I do think there is a difference, even if not just with artificial intelligence, even with algorithms, social media, and artificial intelligence, that the difference is a technology where the assembly line will do what it's going to do. It moves in that direction or maybe that direction. Your assembly line can't easily be used to manipulate your emotions, your cognitions. It is not perceived as a sentient entity. And I make a note of perceived as, because the reality is it doesn't necessarily need to get to the point where the artificial intelligence is sentient in a true and meaningful way. It really needs to get to the point where someone believes it is. And what you see if you talk to the average person, even just throughout the US, is that many people already believe that even the large language models of GPT have sentience, emotionality, intention, the ability to think and feel. We know that that's not accurate, but people already believe that. And so by a fundamental level, the way that humans interact with this technology is, to an extent, distinct from how we've previously interacted with technologies. Now, we've always anthropomorphized. When I had a pet rock as a kid, I would be desperately sad if that rock had cracked or been destroyed. We've given genders to technology. Oh, she's a good boat. She's a good car. Janet, she's been doing well for me for all these years. So we've always anthropomorphized, but it reduces the hurdle we have to go through to anthropomorphize a technology that is almost built to convince us that it is sentient. And so there's that one bit of pushback. And I think the way that we think about the integration, and Lee mentioned at the beginning of this, I led a session on this at the most recent Society for Industrial Organizational Psychology conference on well-being versus performance as the ultimate criteria of science and organizations. And if you look at something like, for the IO psychologists, we officially have a mandate to care about well-being. PSYOP's mission is to enhance human well-being and performance in organizations and work settings by promoting the science, practice, and teaching of IO psychology. You go one broader to the American Psychological Association. It mentions specifically to use scientific knowledge to benefit society and improve lives. And I think a lot of these conversations about integration, whether it be on the business side, whether it be on the theory side, can be talked about at different levels. There's the individual level. Do I use AI for this? Maybe that's an ethical consideration, an ethical question. But there's also a more societal question of what is the purpose of new technology? If, as a society, on their minor scale, as a company, we determine that the sole use and value of our company, of our society, is productivity, then yes, you will see AI, you will see automation, you will see whatever new technology comes forward take away jobs if it is cheaper than the human labor that you're employing. Because that is the ultimate goal that you're striving toward. If your North Star is we need to perform faster, better, more, humans have a limit to which they can do that. If companies abide by, and you'll see this a lot in the vision statements and the mottos, we want to make a better world of work, we want our people to be happy, I think it comes to a very intentional sit down and recollect and say, what is our actual mission? Is it just to be more productive? What society does that lead to? What future does that lead to? It's a reasonably bleak one. It's a very manipulative one. It is one where everything is done to get gain. And that world does not value human. It values the humans who have enough wealth to operate the systems and operate the infrastructure for certain AI systems, but it doesn't value the average person. A company, a society that values well-being, that values people living and experiencing and being healthy and enjoying life and having meaningful work, that is one in which I see AI doing phenomenal things. And even in 2017, right, Stephen Hawking had the great quote of, perhaps we should stop for a moment and focus not only on making AI better and more successful, but also making it a benefit for humanity. And I frequently go back to that concept and that thought if I'm talking with an executive, if I'm talking with a company, if I'm talking just with another IO psychologist of, yes, this technology is here. Yes, we're using it. We think about it in a different way than we have previously. But it comes down to what is our purpose of use and how intentional are we being with that use case? And I think that can lead to the two pathways that we talk about a lot of the dystopia versus the utopia, or even just at the more minor level, a slightly better world or a slightly darker world. And I think those are the decisions that we're making every day. And I think with this conversation will be useful for a lot of people making those decisions, just hearing that thought and being like, oh, I need to be intentional about this process.
Well, thank you for opening that box because, there's this great question that I have of, I've listened to some economists, and I'd love an IO psychologist to weigh in on this. And they say, we've got society and we have the economy, and the economy is a tool to build our society. But what we've actually done is our economy is our society. Is that a great path to be on? Doesn't feel like it. And do we need to really make the economy our economy and get back to building our society?
I'll put one argument out here, and I'm very happy to cede my time and let other people answer this, because that's a really great question. I think that I certainly relate to the idea that the economy should be for the society. It should be to allow societal functioning, to enhance societal functioning. One of the, I won't say it verbatim, but like one of the best quotes that I love is, "A society grows great when old men plant trees, the shade of which they will never see." The idea of, the purpose of a society should be to make a better society for the next generation, to make the world a little bit better. And I think there is possibility with that, even in the like classic capitalistic structure, we want money, is that if those who are winning in that system have the right intentionality of wanting to give back, wanting their success to not only benefit them, but to benefit society as a whole, I think you still see that as a successful system. Now, does that always happen? I would argue very frequently not. It is this element of, when I had my session on well-being and performance, it was someone mentioned, greed always comes into the equation. That at some level, someone goes, a little bit more, let's take 2 cookies, let's take 3 cookies out of the pot. And I kind of responded to that with, well, I'm greedy. I'm deeply greedy. I'm greedy for humanity. I want us to be happy. To me, and I don't know the full quote on this one, so I can't give it as eloquently, but it was the idea of, why do you actually want money? It's infrequently because you want the money itself, though it has become that way in a lot of modern society. You want it to be able to have that beautiful park in your neighborhood, to be able to spend time with family, to be healthy, to have work that you enjoy. Like, that's what you want the money for. And keeping that in sight is, I think, one of the most impactful things, to make sure that that's what the money gets used for, rather than just, I want the money for the money, and more money is good money. It's feeling like, but what for? And having that what for, having that why, I think is a question that infrequently gets asked, but is a very important one.
I'm always fascinated by the movie Wall Street. Great performance by Michael Douglas. It's a movie about how greed could destroy things, but the only thing people remember is one line: greed is good. Thank you, Hollywood. Thank you very much, Ian. LindaAnn, back to you.
I love the fact that Ian set my commentary up perfectly. Couldn't be a better segue, because one of the things that I wanted to say was that when you think about AI, and we can go back to the economy in a second, but when you think about AI and how it's performative, right, to expectations. So regardless of what you ask it to do, it's going to give you what was defined as an expectation for its response to that, right? And if you think about, can it replace humans? Well, there are humans that kind of function that way, right? And it works for a while until you see beyond the veil. But basically, humans who function that way are seen as having a mental disorder, right? Because you can't get to the point of their operating system is so different than your own, right? Because of the lack of compassion, they can function in an, like I said, performative way, but there's nothing real behind it. And that doesn't work with other humans. And so I think we have to think about that. It might, when you ask AI to do certain things, whether it's executive coaching or whatever, it has a limitation where it doesn't function the way a human interacting with it really needs it to function. So it's a surface level, right? It's very, very shallow. And so we need to understand that about it. Now, as far as Ian's commentary on the economy and so forth, I think the economy and society is kind of, a little bit of that balloon, right? Where you squeeze it on one side and the other. And if you have some kind of understanding of survival, you have to stop squeezing before it breaks and then go back the other way, right? So it's the pendulum or the balloon or whatever. I think that in fact, some of the ways that our economy has responded in the past couple of days, you go, oh, maybe that's not going to work. And so let's back off of this for a minute, So, yeah.
Couldn't I, though, because, if I can train AI to be the leader that I want, I've often heard that, a narcissist makes a great CEO. My bottom line looks great. So how do we stop people from doing that?
Well, that's a different podcast, Tom.
Okay. Well, we'll just leave that question for another podcast. Thank you very much, LindaAnn. Nick, let's go to you.
There's a lot to respond to. A couple of things I heard last week in regards to kind of the AI thing, kind of the idea of an IO Hippocratic oath. Keep in mind, first, do no harm. Let's not bring bad information to light, or let's not rush, but let's be considerate of how we implement these things and make sure that the consequences of those decisions don't hurt people. I think Lee was kind of talking to it a little bit. There's the law of entropy in physics, and I think if you leave a system to run on its own, it is going to tend towards chaos one way or another. So taking that out of the physical world into what we're seeing in the digital space. One interesting thing, there was a session on new competencies, and the idea was, some of the jobs that are on the slate to disappear are postal carriers, and the other side of the spectrum is AI engineers are coming up next. And so, do we really have a plan in place to walk somebody who's been a postal carrier to be an AI engineer? That's a large gap to try and cross. And I think those are the sorts of things when you put humans in the equation with the decisions of what's coming in. Yes, we understand that there's going to be attrition and addition, but how do we make that less bumpy? Is it moving every little dot, one up the chain? Or is it that we have to go back and really pull this whole pool of people who are going to be hurting, who are going to be economically uncertain? Well, how do we take care of them? How do we put them back to work? How do we upskill them and consider some of that as well? And unfortunately, we see with so many people, there's kind of this lowest common denominator. If I don't have to think about it, and Microsoft says Copilot is AI and it does the job that I need it to do, or Gemini, or whatever brand of it is, well, yeah, it's easy to be like, okay, well, I know what sci-fi tells me, and that these systems are ready to go, and so I'm just going to trust that, and then I'm going to imprint my humanity onto it, and I'm going to treat it like a friend. And that lowest common denominator means you don't have to think critically. And so I think, what is the data going into these systems? Where's the money coming from? And kind of this critical thinking and this media literacy, we're not at a point where we can just take it as gospel. I mean, it is so ubiquitous already that it's around us at all times. So it feels like we should be able to trust it. But really, this stuff's only been in public use for a few years. And there was probably a reason why it took so long to get to public use based on those who were, developing it behind closed doors. And once it's out of the box, it's hard to bring back in. There was, again, another session last week where we talked about, concepts like grit or growth mindset, all these things that were created in the lab, that were constructs that were put, in place by very smart people to measure very specific things. Well, then they got out into the public eye and they got used and reused. And all of a sudden, these constructs that meant one thing now through pop culture and language have morphed to mean something very, very different. And it's not the intent of the author that has created the message, but kind of the intent of the audience. And I think that could very easily happen with all of this. And to Emmy's point earlier, and I think we talked about this when we got together, the idea that, do you have a plan in place for the potential human collateral? Like, yes, progress is good and all of this, but do we have a landing spot for people to upskill if they choose, to retire safely, to say, what, I'm going to lead the movement against and say, yes, this tool is out here, but I want people to have something to do. I know it's not the most efficient, but I'm going to keep my servers with a pen and pad instead of the tablet in their hand. The deliberate choices that organizations can make around technology are fascinating, and I think that will really kind of be an indicator of how human-centric they are. Like, yeah, I know that's out there, and I actively choose not to use it because my people are more important.
Yeah, when I go to a restaurant, I know I could order off an iPad, but I like having a server. I don't want to see that change. Thank you very much for that, Dr. Emmy. Back to you.
Oh, I've just loved these contributions, and I've been taking notes here as everyone's been talking. So thank you so much for all of this so far. So I did want to touch on a couple of things that several have said here. I'll kind of start with what Nick was talking about there. I think that's exactly what human-centric leadership is. It's not saying that we're not going to ever lose jobs in this transition, right? It is saying that, what does that look like for your resources afterward? Are you providing a transition plan? Are you helping them upskill into a new role if you've got a new role opening, right? Or are you firing them and hiring someone? What are those human focused practices that you're using to transition, right? It's not saying let's not adopt, right? I actually have building technology for 15 years. I love technology. I use AI every single day for things, but I don't use it for many of the things that I know I, as a human, I don't use it to create an interface between my resources when they're complaining about things, right? I could maybe have a clone of me that's responding to them, but it's not providing them true empathy or compassion. And so I don't use it for those the parts of humanity focused, leadership that are out there that we really do need to retain. But we've been in this predicament before, right? Like, what is the profit or what is the outcome that we're looking for, right? And some people are focused on that profit, or some people are looking for a certain outcome. But when we think about how businesses have operated historically, we do see profit motives do run a lot of organizations, right? And big organizations, for that matter. It's in my opinion, and I think we can look at this statistically too, it is more profitable to keep you sick than to keep you well. So has that ever influenced any of our pharma? Lawsuits probably tell us maybe a little bit of yes, right? So these are hard conversations, but they're the reality that businesses are profit focused, especially as your profits get larger and larger. You have people who are invested in this, boards, right? Those conversations are difficult, and we do have to understand that businesses are not here just to be socially responsible. They're here to make profits. They're here to do lots of things. But I think that corporate social responsibility conversation needs to be resurrected. What is our responsibility to our people, to our society, right? We've talked a little bit about the social element there. And, that I put a bell curve in the chat that's from The Diffusion of Innovations is the book. And some organizations are not risk tolerant, right? When you think I work in the medical field right now, there are in some areas lots of innovations happening, robotic surgery, AI assisted medical care, right? There's even a company out there that had these AI boxes in malls where you could go see a physician in this box that had an AI thing in it where you were talking to it. And people are actually perceiving, and like Ian mentioned, they think they're getting empathy from technology. In fact, they're showing that they actually prefer feedback from AI versus humans. So we all know what we feel like should happen, right? But the reality is that's not what we're actually seeing happen. And although we may not be able to jump on that early adopter or innovator, zone in the bell curve, it is time for organizations to examine what that means. We're seeing malleable values based on even an administration change, right? Organizations are changing their missions and their visions and some of their corporate policies based on a change in administration. And so if we change based on the society's pressure on the outside, are we focusing on the humans on the inside? And I would say no, right? I think that's, let's shift with the wind a little bit and make it easier for the dollars, right? For the profit part of it. And I think those are the realities that we have to face. And I think this is something that we've experienced before, a gap between what we should do and what we're seeing actually happen, not just in companies. We see it in government. We see it in all kinds of spheres, right? And I did put a link in the chat as well. I mean, there are experimental AI governance that's happening right now. For Canada was listed in there, Tom, as some experimental AI decision making via through their government even. I mean, these are policy makers, right? These are people who do impact your day-to-day life and what you actually experience when you go out into the world. And so the reality is we know what should happen, but we're seeing things that aren't following that direction or what the evidence says we should be moving towards, right? And so that there's a big gap here, I think, that needs to be bridged in some areas. It's obviously not going to be a solution that we'll come up with tomorrow, but I think this is an area where that area track record is one of the things that I mentioned was in that human-centric leadership scale. And I think this is to LindaAnn's point, you have to have already had a track record of leading well to be able to start moving into this zone of leading well. And so I think there's a deficiency there too, right? We haven't taught people to lead well yet. And so that track record isn't there in some organizations for their leaders. I know that I've experienced that personally. And so we're not really able to move into that next zone until we help them establish an effective track record of what leadership really is. And lastly, I'll say that I think being human-centric is a choice, right? You can be profit-centric. You can be situational. You can be many things, right? But to focus on people and empathy and compassion and to remember that we are the reason that organizations even exist, right? We have to have an idea and create, a company around it and create a product, right? I think it's a choice that for me is easy, but I'm just seeing is not always. And there is an author, and I think it was 1932 that the book came out. Yes, called Brave New World, Aldous Huxley. And he says, people will come to love their oppression, to adore the technologies that undo their capacity to think. And this was written almost 100 years ago, right? So it's a very interesting perspective when we take a look at what's happening today and thinking technologies and where we're heading. So,
Yeah, I'm so glad we're having the conversation today because AI is coming and we all need to prepare. And it's great that IO psychology is actually involved. But I sometimes feel, or I'm a little worried that today we've been talking about checkers, but quantum computing, which I don't know enough about, is coming down the pipe. And that's chess, not checkers. So how quickly are we going to need to move? And if we're going straight down the path, are we about to take a sharp turn to the right or left?
I'll put together some resources. In 2 weeks, we're going to be talking about this buzzword concept of the future of work. I think that's the right place to bring that. I'll bring it back for you, Tom.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Ian, let's go to you.
I was just laughing to myself of people mentioning, oh, we're quoting Brave New World more frequently. I find myself quoting Brave New World, but also the movie Idiocracy much more frequently. Just very prescient. But there was a thought that I had throughout all of this, and I think it would be an important one to mention, that someone listening to this might hear a yes versus a no, almost kind of a straw man of you can use AI or you have to choose not to use it. And I think the reality and where there is nuance and also the doing the right thing is saying, okay, there is value here. Let's figure out how to use certain technologies. So it's really the question of not yes or no, but how. And the how is more often than not, get input from the people who are going to be working with this technology. Say, hey, employees, if you're leader of a company, we're considering integrating this technology in this way. We'd like to hear what you think. As you begin using it, what are the challenges? What's it doing really well? Having that open communication can be so critical in making sure that it's not a yes-no question. It's still human-centric, but it's the humans who are helping you to learn the best way to use this new tool. And similarly, I tie that in with an extra point to kind of throw one extra grenade at the end of this talk here of there are new considerations for both trust and security with the advent and the integration. Even if you do it right, you ask the how, people are satisfied and happy with the new technology and how it's being used, you now have a whole new world of how do we protect our intellectual property? How do we make sure that the property we're using generated by AI is protecting intellectual property? What if it goes off? There was a joke earlier this year that one of our department heads sent out to say, hey, if your students are turning in papers late, it's because ChatGPT is down for the night. And there were a lot of students who turned their papers in late because they didn't have access to this technology. So there's an additional question of what happens if it turns off? What happens if it's corrupted? So the new advent of cyber warfare would be, can I poison your database? Can I inject a certain sentiment? Can I inject a certain piece of information into this database that's going to poison the results and be telling everyone incorrect things that sway performance, sway markets, sway the data that goes into, oh yeah, we didn't think that a human was good enough to run this nuclear system, the nuclear power grid. And so we've integrated AI to be able to track these things. But what if I spike a certain signal that makes it seem like there's a meltdown and I shut down a nuclear power plant because that's the new advent of cyber warfare? There's all of these new considerations that are going to play in. And again, it goes back to me for the intentionality. Know what you're doing and think about what are the new threats that may manifest, even if I do everything right. What are the new threats that manifest? How am I making sure that we can still function if this technology breaks down, turns off, is corrupted for a period of time? How do we still function? And that's just one of those additional considerations that I think is very important.
I think that's, once again, another podcast episode. But thank you very much for that, Ian. LindaAnn, let's go to you.
I think Ian said it perfectly in that, because my point was that these are all tools, right? And so when I go into an organization, I make sure that I'm constantly using the word, this is a tool. You adapt it, you modify it, you integrate it, but this is just something else you can use to facilitate whatever it is that you want to accomplish. And the thing that really is helpful is I can give them this tool, because it's often easier to edit, modify, all those kinds of things than it is to create. So let me give you this. This was created. I used ChatGPT or some other form of AI to create this. I evaluated it. This is not a cold piece of information. I went through it, made sure that it met all the criteria, but you in your job, your environment, know best what you really need. So this is a starting point. It's not an end point. And to use it that way. And just to make a final point on Ian's comment about things shutting down. Several years ago, I was watching Chicago Fire, right? And they have this system of how everything goes out, how they manage all the calls, right? Well, that system went down. And so it was all the boomers and elder millennials who had to go back into the manual system and save the day, right? So having some of that institutional knowledge was really, really helpful. But we have to think about that, right? And that's the value of having older people in the organization with perspective and a different skill set that learn how to integrate it and make it effective. Shout out to us, Tom.
Old people save the day. I can live with that one. Thank you very much for that. Emmy, our hour is up. Great topic, great conversation. Any final thoughts?
Yeah, I'll just say something related to what LindaAnn was talking about. I've been developing technology for a long time. So by the time I met my husband, I'm city girl, techie. He's taught me lots about living and, camping and doing things not through technology and through, my comforts and all the things that I have, had being a girl that's grown up in the city and had access to everything immediately. Amazon can deliver to me tonight, right? So just interesting, because when things do go down, when I don't have Wi-Fi in a weather event, the world completely changes. And so it's interesting how, we've become so ingrained with our tech. But also we're expected to be, right? People are expecting you to answer the phone when you call. People expect you to answer emails or be on camera in a Zoom call, right? These are expectations that really are kind of unspoken even. And when our tech goes down, it's a whole transformative experience for us. Just ask my kids when the Wi-Fi is off.
We're totally lost. What are we going to talk about next week?
So next week's topic is called the expectation dilemma, balancing organizational and employee needs. So we're seeing things like return to office mandates, but seeing increases in desire for well-being and flexibility. So where are some of these disconnects, and where can we bridge some of those gaps?
That sounds great. And if anyone would like to join us, if you're listening to the podcast, we are live on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern. Just go to the CBOC website, get your invitation. It's absolutely free, and share your voice with the rest of the world. Thank you very much, Dr. Emmy, for leading us again today. And thank you to everybody who contributed and those people who are here to watch us as well. Thank you very much. And Emmy, if you want to count us out, we'll see everyone back here in 1 week's time.
3, 2, and 1.